Parmeet is a very, very good friend. He's a neighbor and a very accomplished technologist in the industry. And some of you know him from previous relationships with Xoriant. A couple of just bullet list here. He has 30 plus years of experience in the industry, particularly as it relates to enterprise architecture, infrastructure, cloud, data, apps, all of the above. He did his bachelor's and master's in MIT, and his first job was with Oracle. And remember a guy by the name Mark Benioff?
Yeah.
He's the CEO of Salesforce.com. He used to work for Oracle, and Parmeet used to work for Mark. Then he moved on to a company called Corio, which later got acquired by IBM. And then later he moved on to EMC, where he was running the global alliances, working for a fellow by name Pat Gelsinger. Does that name sound familiar?
Of course.
Yeah, the CEO of VMware. So he keeps good companies. So then he went on to work in the management team of a company called Nutanix. Have you heard of that company? Yeah, the one that had a great IPO. And so Parmeet was in the management team there running professional services, customer success, everything to do with after the product. And most recently, and that's about 3 years ago, he joined the founding team of a company called Cloud Simple. And I'm sure you heard the news that just a couple of months ago, Cloud Simple got acquired by Google for several $100 million. So, and whatever he does, he'll do very well. He's a very bright, focused, and a confident man. All the things we talked about yesterday. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, give a big hand to Parmeet Chadha.
My friend is very kind. He's a dear friend. So he reached out, a couple of days ago.
Yes.
Hey, here's an idea. You want to come and share some thoughts? It's a Saturday. I said, great. You'll get me out of bed. Otherwise I'll be sleeping until noon. Anyway, so it's my pleasure and honor to be here to just share some thoughts of some of the learnings I have had over the years. One core lesson learned just from a career trajectory perspective, there is never a straight line, and if you can get comfortable with the zigzag, that's where the magic lies, and that's sort of been my life. We talked about a lot of the high points. There have been tons of low points of putting everything that you have and losing everything that you have and restarting all over again and so on. So this ebb and flow is really what shapes us, and we are very fortunate to be a part of this valley journey where opportunities just keep coming, right? As long as you're patient and you're persistent, opportunities just keep coming. Obviously, the big opportunity in front of us is all things cloud. I mean, it's cloud everywhere. The values are going up. The market share of the cloud providers is going up. And with that, what I witnessed, particularly in the last 3-4 years of actually dealing with cloud from the inside, is that in the industry there are certain myths that have emerged about the cloud, and it's not surprising because whenever there is a new wave, particularly in our tech industry, the hype always gets ahead of the reality, always, right? And the cloud is no different. So I'll take next few minutes and just share some thoughts. I just pulled these together very quickly yesterday. Sort of what I believe are some of the myths out there, and it'll be good to kind of get your feedback and input as well in this discussion. So I guess a show of hands, how many of you guys believe AWS is the winner in the cloud? So far. Yeah, that's the catch so far. So, and I'll share some numbers with you guys. I'm sure many of you guys are perhaps already familiar with some of these numbers. That a lot of the analysts, a lot of the press, a lot of the industry pundits are, oh, game over, AWS is out of reach, nobody can catch them, and so on. There's an inflection point, right? And that's really what this line represents. It's not the end line, it's not the finish line. There's an inflection point where cloud has become front and center. And at that inflection point, the player that is dominant by far is AWS, absolutely, right? And they are dominant by the virtue of two things. Obviously, a first mover advantage. They were the first one to actually see this, that this is how computing and storage will be consumed. And number two, they actually utilize the Kool-Aid they themselves were drinking, right, and repurpose that for other enterprises, right? So they have those two things going on together, and hence at this inflection point, yeah, whatever 40% odd market share and so on, it's all goodness. But there's a long journey ahead of us. Finish line is nowhere in sight yet, right? So what we are witnessing with the cloud, or what is called a cloud, maybe there'll be a different name for it 5 years from now, but it's just the beginning of the journey. So what does that really mean in terms of hard numbers? So if you look at some of the studies from IDC, this is actually a projection which they had made back in 2016, and they have been updating that. IDC actually has been fairly accurate so far in terms of their projections on how the spend, overall IT spend will shift from the enterprise to the cloud. And obviously there are different shades of cloud that you'll see out there, public cloud, hybrid cloud. You also have cloud technologies that are now finding way back into the enterprise itself, surprisingly. So if you really do the breakdown of traditional data center versus private cloud and public cloud, they have been fairly accurate, right? But the reality is, let me see if this works. No? Yeah, okay. All right. So this is roughly where we are, right? So it's as you can see, it's a fairly sizable 2 trillion.
3.7 trillion.
There you go. 3.8 trillion was 2019. This year actually is expected to cross 4 trillion. Okay, so when we look at that $100 billion number, big, huge, but barely scratching the surface. Okay. And that's why it's an inflection point nowhere near the finish line. Okay? Other thing to actually observe is what is the growth rate of these players. As a matter of fact, AWS, first out of the blocks, their growth rate 2019 about 30-35%. Right? And it's slowing. Growth rate of Azure, 60+%. Growth rate of Google Cloud, 80+%, obviously of a smaller base, right? These two players plus Alibaba. Alibaba is unique because they're very China-centric. Now they're gradually expanding into Asia and parts of Europe. These players in particular, their growth rate is actually accelerating. Okay? So just hold those growth rate numbers in mind when you look at sort of, this is not by analysts, this is my own projection with very simple math, that if we believe that the growth rate of these cloud providers in 2019 holds, remember, Google and Microsoft are actually accelerating, but let's assume the growth rate holds. And similarly for AWS, which is slowing down, but their growth rate is also flatlining. And you project this 4 years from now, you see the leadership starting to change hands. Okay, it's just simply a matter of numbers. There are a few other factors that it is premature to declare the winners, because Azure as a cloud is fundamentally very different, not just technology-wise, but business strategy-wise, use case-wise. Azure is perhaps most mature if you look at the totality from infra plus apps plus data. Okay? Azure is most mature in terms of getting enterprise accounts. true core large enterprise IT. Okay? Azure is most mature today in terms of adding cloud to their ELAs. Okay? AWS is very developer-centric, that's where the success has been. Very infrastructure-centric, that's where the success has been. They have done fantastic innovation there. Except they have innovated in the layer, which as you know, is at the end of the day, commodity in the stack, which is infrastructure. Okay? So these are realities. Google. Obviously, I'm a part of Google Cloud now, starting to see the dynamics from inside out. There is a sea change happening there. 2 trillion.
3.7 trillion.
There you go. 3.8 trillion was 2019. This year actually is expected to cross 4 trillion. Okay, so when we look at that $100 billion number, big, huge, but barely scratching the surface. Okay, and that's why it's an inflection point, nowhere near the finish line. Okay. Other thing to actually observe is what is the growth rate of these players. As a matter of fact, AWS, first out of the blocks, their growth rate 2019 about 30-35%, right? And it's slowing. Growth rate of Azure 60+%. Growth rate of Google Cloud 80+%, obviously of a smaller base, right? These two players plus Alibaba. Alibaba is unique because they're very China-centric. Now they're gradually expanding into Asia and parts of Europe. These players in particular, their growth rate is actually accelerating. Okay, so just hold those growth rate numbers in mind when you look at sort of, this is not by analysts, this is my own projection with very simple math, that if we believe that the growth rate of these cloud providers in 2019 holds, remember, Google and Microsoft are actually accelerating, but let's assume the growth rate holds. And similarly for AWS, which is slowing down, but their growth rate is also flatlining. And you project this 4 years from now, you see the leadership starting to change hands. Okay, it's just simply a matter of numbers. There are a few other factors that it is premature to declare the winners because Azure as a cloud is fundamentally very different, not just technology-wise, but business strategy-wise, use case-wise. Azure is perhaps most mature if you look at the totality from infra plus apps plus data. Okay? Azure is most mature in terms of getting enterprise accounts. True core large enterprise IT. Okay? Azure is most mature today in terms of adding cloud to their ELAs. Okay? AWS is very developer-centric, that's where the success has been. Very infrastructure-centric, that's where the success has been. They have done fantastic innovation there. Except they have innovated in the layer, which as you know, is at the end of the day, commodity in the stack, which is infrastructure. Okay? So these are realities. Google. Obviously, I'm a part of Google Cloud now, starting to see the dynamics from inside out. There's a sea change happening there. Out of those 14,000, 7,000 are enterprise sellers from Oracle, from Dell, from HP, from VMware. Okay? So they are going after this aggressively. The way they went about buying my previous company, CloudSimple, I don't know if you guys know, CloudSimple was actually a Microsoft company. Microsoft invested in us, round one. Microsoft led our second round of funding. Azure is the first cloud on which we built and launched our service. Azure is what we are in production on. With Google Cloud, we just went into early access about 2 weeks ago. But guess who bought us? Okay, so Thomas Courier is taking no prisoners, right? So that dynamism inside the shop, because it's all about people. It's never about technology. It is how hungry the people are to go after what they want. Okay, so this battle has just started. So as you pick and choose as to, hey, which cloud should we build affinity with? I'll share some trends later. Please do not pick a winner yet. You don't have a choice as a service provider. You have to work with all of them. Okay? The magic is going to be, how do you build practices which actually is a common footprint to be able to service the customers in any cloud. The role that you play in making clouds agnostic to your enterprise IT customers is where you're going to make money. Not by taking them into AWS or an Azure or a Google and so on. Okay. All right. So that was the first myth, that it's winner takes all and AWS is the winner and let's just go and place all our bets on AWS and we'll be done. No, not at all. Second one is that there is this very rightful and very justified shift in spend patterns for IT. IT used to be centrally CapEx bound. You will have annual budgets, you will have 3 years plans, CIOs and their team will spend 3 months at the end of the year preparing for the next year. CFO will spend another 3 months reviewing that and approving it. So you basically had 2 quarters that you used to sync every year, and 2 quarters you did any actual work and actual spending. But it was a CapEx model. So the goodness with that was, yes, while it was slow, it had a lot of latency, it was very frustrating for the operating teams, particularly in IT and so on, but it had predictability. That if I believe my business is going to be at this level, this is a percentage of the IT spend I can afford, right? This is my plan laid out. My procurement cycle is going to be 3 months. I'm going to spend another 3 months in actually deploying what I buy. And once I deploy, it remains entrenched with me for at least next 3 years of amortization. And beyond that amortization, I will actually mine the zero value asset for another 2 years. And hence, these big boxes I have inside my data centers, I will amortize over 3 years, I use them over 5 years, and that's where the value will happen. Okay? So predictable, you own the asset, you extract the value as much as you want, and so on, right? So that was kind of the traditional market. Now, obviously, that also had a flip side, which was that, okay, it was stodgy, it took forever for the business users and customers of IT to get their needs fulfilled. And that's where sort of a little bit of this model started to emerge. But hey, what if the end users can self-service their requirements? What's the model for that? The cloud happened. Okay, how do you pay for it? Pay as you go, right? And so the level of nimbleness started to come about. Okay, and that's where there's been touted that OpEx is the nirvana. Everybody should abandon CapEx, go to OpEx. You pay as you go. Lots and lots of benefits, right? But is that really the truth? Here is my prediction. The biggest headwind to the cloud and its consumption model would be the consumption model. It would be the CFO saying, what the hell? I mean, I'm bleeding right, left, and center. I'm getting attacked by all these tiny icebergs from all sides that I didn't even know. My VP of sales is going off and adding another 500 users to the CRM, and I got my development team sitting in Ukraine, spinning up all kinds of assets and so on in AWS and Azure. I don't even know what's where. I have no predictability from that perspective. So this is going to spin on its head. Today the trajectory is everybody lock, stock, and barrel, move away from CapEx into OpEx. There is going to be a blowback. That's my prediction. Whether that blowback happens in the next 12 months or next 3 years, it is coming. And that is what is actually going to slow down the cloud growth rate. Today it seems like there is no end in sight, right? And that doesn't mean like everything else in our industry, that doesn't mean it's going to sunset. No. Don't get me wrong. Cloud is here to dominate.
Cell phones, if you go back about 15 years, in the early days of cell phone pricing, you kind of had this. Sometimes your bill could be 350, sometimes it could be 50, and then they came up with these sort of tiered things where, or if you paid 70, 80 bucks. I wonder if that kind of concept can come into here.
Absolutely. So I think there is opportunity for your enterprise IT customers. There is an opportunity for you to help them in innovating their consumption patterns. in building predictability to how they also spend in the cloud. But most important lesson, please do not abandon on-premises. Please do not abandon the traditional data center. Again, 3.8 trillion versus 100 billion, okay? The cake is still there.
So,
Out of those 14,000, 7,000 are enterprise sellers from Oracle, from Dell, from HP, from VMware. Okay, so they are going after this aggressively. The way they went about buying my previous company, CloudSimple, I don't know if you guys know, CloudSimple was actually a Microsoft company. Microsoft invested in us, round one. Microsoft led our second round of funding. Azure is the first cloud on which we built and launched our service. Azure is what we are in production on. With Google Cloud, we just went into early access about 2 weeks ago. But guess who bought us? Okay, so Thomas Courier is taking no prisoners, right? So that dynamism inside the shop, because it's all about people. It's never about technology. It is how hungry the people are to go after what they want. Okay, so this battle has just started. So as you pick and choose as to, hey, which cloud should we build affinity with? I'll share some trends later. Please do not pick a winner yet. You don't have a choice as a service provider. You have to work with all of them. Okay? The magic is going to be, how do you build practices which actually is a common footprint to be able to service the customers in any cloud. The role that you play in making clouds agnostic to your enterprise IT customers is where you're going to make money. Not by taking them into AWS or an Azure or a Google and so on. Okay. All right. So that was the first myth, that it's winner takes all and AWS is the winner and let's just go and place all our bets on AWS and it'll be done. No, not at all. Second one is that there is this very rightful and very justified shift in spend patterns for IT. IT used to be centrally CapEx bound. You will have annual budgets, you will have 3 years plans, CIOs and their team will spend 3 months at the end of the year preparing for the next year. CFO will spend another 3 months reviewing that and approving it. So you basically had 2 quarters that you used to sync every year and 2 quarters you did any actual work and actual spending. But it was a CapEx model. So the goodness with that was, yes, while it was slow, it had a lot of latency, it was very frustrating for the operating teams, particularly in IT and so on, but it had predictability. That if I believe my business is going to be at this level, this is a percentage of the IT spend I can afford, right? This is my plan laid out. My procurement cycle is going to be 3 months. I'm going to spend another 3 months in actually deploying what I buy. And once I deploy, it remains entrenched with me for at least next 3 years of amortization. And beyond that amortization, I will actually mine the zero value asset for another 2 years. And hence, these big boxes I have inside my data centers, I will amortize over 3 years, I use them over 5 years, and that's where the value will happen. Okay? So predictable, you own the asset, you extract the value as much as you want, and so on, right? So that was kind of the traditional market. Now, obviously, that also had a flip side, which was that, okay, it was stodgy, it took forever for the business users and customers of IT to get their needs fulfilled. And that's where sort of a little bit of this model started to emerge. But hey, what if the end users can self-service their requirements? What's the model for that? The cloud happened. Okay, how do you pay for it? Pay as you go, right? And so the level of nimbleness started to come about. Okay, and that's where there's been touted that OpEx is the nirvana. Everybody should abandon CapEx, go to OpEx. You pay as you go. Lots and lots of benefits, right? But is that really the truth? Here is my prediction. The biggest headwind to the cloud and its consumption model would be the consumption model. It would be the CFO saying, what the hell? I mean, I'm bleeding right, left, and center. I'm getting attacked by all these tiny icebergs from all sides that I didn't even know. My VP of sales is going off and adding another 500 users to the CRM, and I got my development team sitting in Ukraine, spinning up all kinds of assets and so on in AWS and Azure. I don't even know what's where. I have no predictability from that perspective. So this is going to spin on its head. Today the trajectory is everybody lock, stock, and barrel, move away from CapEx into OpEx. There is going to be a blowback. That's my prediction. Whether that blowback happens in the next 12 months or next 3 years, it is coming. And that is what is actually going to slow down the cloud growth rate. Today it seems like there is no end in sight, right? And that doesn't mean like everything else in our industry, that doesn't mean it's going to sunset. No. Don't get me wrong. Cloud is here to dominate.
You know, cell phones, if you go back about 15 years, in the early days of cell phone pricing, you kind of had this. Sometimes your bill could be 350, sometimes it could be 50, and then they came up with these sort of tiered things where, or if you paid 70, 80 bucks. I wonder if that kind of concept can come into here.
Absolutely. So I think there is opportunity for your enterprise IT customers. There is an opportunity for you to help them in innovating their consumption patterns, in building predictability to how they also spend in the cloud. But most important lesson, please do not abandon on-premises. Please do not abandon the traditional data center. Again, 3.8 trillion versus 100 billion, okay? The cake is still there.
So
It's actually an interesting point because we recently went through an assessment of what to do with our Exchange server and a collaboration tool and a video conferencing solution. Parimal and I, we spent a lot of time doing this, and I said if we do all this on the cloud using Microsoft, all their solutions, and we took like a 5-year period, and it looked like $5 million, $1 million per year spent on it, versus our current spend would be around $300K if we just continue to just upgrade our hardware and software.
Sure.
So this is exactly the same thing we went through the last 3 months.
How many of you guys track VMware closely in terms of their financial performance? Yeah, quite a few of you. About 3 years ago, if you go and read unanimously across the board the analyst reports on VMware, everybody was declaring VMware is done and dusted. Okay? Why? Because their core market, which is to virtualize compute, right? At that point of time, 89%. 89% of the compute, the target market that they had was already taken by them. Where are they going to grow? Okay. So they did the BMC thing, which is very similar to what we did at Cloud Simple. They did that with AWS, and obviously they worked with us to enable the same capability with Azure and Google and others. What perhaps you guys don't know is that VMC by design prohibits BYOL. You cannot bring your existing VMware licenses, even if you have them under long-term ELAs, you cannot bring those into the cloud. There's nothing to do with technology. It's just simply the contractual construct VMware came up with that, hey, we draw a distinction between on-prem license and the cloud license. It's the same damn technology. Okay, just a different key. Why? Because they knew the trend line is either those customers are going to abandon them on-prem and go to cloud native. Well, if they're going to go to the cloud, how can they still keep consuming VMware? Okay, so VMware has very tactfully been able to retain that V-tax, if you will, right? And customers actually, that's actually one of the reasons why it is not, the whole VMC thing is not growing like wildfire. It will, but VMware will be forced to rationalize this licensing model. Okay, so there's a lot of these rubs when you have to kind of go from on-prem to the cloud that your customers come in for a surprise. You have non-IT people starting to spend in the cloud. You have lack of BYOL when you go to the cloud, so what do you do with existing stuff? You have existing hardware. Yeah, fine, it might be 3 years old, but it's working fine. Right? What do I do with that? Yeah, you can get it off your books, but you still have those assets. You have data center long-term commitments, right? So there's a series of factors, and this in itself, in my mind, is a practice. How do you help your customers not just rationalize how and what to move to the cloud, but more importantly, how to rationalize their spend distribution between on-premises and the cloud. That is where the rub is.
So my question is more, I have two questions. Number one is, when you say that do not destruct your own data center, your own hardware, and you still need to go to the cloud. So when I talk to the customers, what I hear that, how can they have the balancing fact? Because when they see the 3, 5, and 7 years of the spend on the cloud, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So when you say that they have to keep the data centers, their own hardware, how do they balance?
So how do you think about it, is your question, in terms of
That's number
rationalizing the move?
Yeah, that's number one question.
Mhm.
Second is data. Data is the one which is growing dramatically. The last 2 years or 3 years, the number of the data which grew is more than any time in the history,
Yeah.
and it's in zettabytes.
Mhm.
The data, if we take that and try to print onto the paper, I read recently that we don't have enough trees on the earth to print that much data.
Yeah.
So if there is so much data, IT spend is going on, who is going to pay for that, right?
Yeah.
Do we need a data delete strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, so the second one is a very profound question and actually probably an hour discussion. But I'll give you my early perspectives on both questions. So the first one, how the customer should think about. So a couple of data points, right? So right now for the customers, there's a sizable number of customers that have actually moved into the cloud, both in terms of cloud native as well as non-cloud native or traditional workloads also now operating in the cloud. They are seeing a TCO advantage. Okay, so they are seeing on average, and there is actually a study that just recently came out, I was reading that last night, that study actually computes that approximately 40% TCO advantage. So sizable, okay? So if you are a CIO or a CFO and you are looking to make a decision that, hey, I'm spending $100 million on my IT, which is to kind of sustain my existing operations, I have another $100 million worth of assets that I already have on the books. 40 million of these assets are actually going to coming off the books, which means they will be fully amortized over the next 12 months. And that's perhaps where my opportunity is to say, okay, I use that as an opportunity to start getting out of the business of being in the data centers and I start adopting the cloud, right? So that's one train of thought, which is just fiscal reality that if I'm going to see roughly 40% TCO advantage, I have a certain number of assets which have been drained down in my books and hence they don't have any financial implications. It's just boxes, hardware, and I can just offload this, and whichever data center this hardware is sitting in, I can retire that. So that's one track you think about. Other thing that you think about is skills. That's very, very critical. It is increasingly becoming harder for enterprise IT to actually find the right skills and retain the right skills. Right? Anything new and modern, the cloud guys are hiring them lock, stock, and barrel. Okay? So that's another factor you have to think about. Yet another factor, my business is becoming very, very dynamic. These stodgy old applications where data goes in and analytics and business decision come out 6 months later is not going to work. I need to be on an infrastructure which is very, very nimble, which is very new, which is in memory, which has AI enablement, on and on and on, right? My business demands that. That's going to be yet another driver, right? So in terms of how your books are playing, how your skills are playing, and how your business dynamics are playing, which requires modernization, is how you have to think about it. So it is not just purely a financial decision, right? To your second question, in summary, tearing of data is going to be an answer. We are, as a society, we are never going to be comfortable with deleting data. Because what is established is that no data is worthless, right? 99% of the data that we aggregate today, right, was considered useless literally 10 years ago, okay? So it has to be data tiering, it has to be more data efficiency. There are going to be some fundamental new technologies that are going to come into the market over the next 10, 15 years, where the media itself is going to change. You're going to have optical media, where you're going to have multi-dimensional storage of data and so on. So there's a whole bunch of innovation happening there. Even though storage is considered commoditized today, storage innovation, there's a whole bunch of new stuff coming in the next 10, 15 years, which is going to address that issue. Okay. All right, so just moving on. You guys are very familiar with the step function of CapEx spend versus on-demand of OpEx. Here is a telling statistic. This is again a number from last year. Of 200 billion odd spend, now this number includes infra and SaaS, the actual wastage you would compute is almost 14 billion. Okay? So what are the factors which lead to that? So fundamentally, department level spend in the cloud, IT not having control over that, IT not having tools in terms of how the spend is happening inside the data center. So these are the kinds of factors which result in this being an uncertainty as to, I have OpEx, pay as you go, but I don't know who I'm paying and when I'm paying. I'm going, but I'm paying all the time, right? So core question again comes down to as individual consumers. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from consumer side for the enterprise as well. Uber, fantastic service, great phenomena, radically new business model and so on. But fundamentally, we still want to go buy cars. We still want to own cars. Why is that? Now, I know some people will say, oh yeah, give it another 5 years, 10 years, nobody's going to buy cars. I bet against that. Now, that doesn't mean Uber is not going to be successful. Actually, Uber is going to be wildly successful in the next 2 years. We will see that. Okay? But people are not going to stop buying cars. There are fundamental reasons for that. So when you go to your enterprise customers, one of the factors that you should keep in mind is what stage is that company in its life? Is it an early stage, fast growing company with lots of uncertainty that they're dealing with every passing day? For them, Uber is great. Okay, I'm running to the city on a Friday night, I don't know if I'm going to find parking, I'll just jump into Uber, hey, I might be drunk after the party, and I'll jump into Uber, safely get home, I just cannot predict these things. Uber is great, OpEx is great. Large company, right, growing at 2% a year, okay, has established budgets, has established spans, right? What makes sense for them? You cannot bring this disruptive OpEx uncertainty into that model. Okay, so they actually have to be a lot more deliberate and measured in how they transform their consumption model. Okay, and there's a full math and a science behind this in terms of how you can help your customers determine what is the right spend pattern for them as they go forward. All right, so fundamentally, my assertion is OpEx is not always good for everybody. There is actually a very interesting term somebody has coined. It's called HIX. Entrench with CapEx, burst with OpEx. Okay, so that's something to think about. HIX, just like the hybrid cloud. So these are all the lessons that are coming about. Okay, that cloud by itself in its purity is not all goodness. OpEx by itself on its purity is not all goodness. Okay? It's a myth if somebody tells you it is all goodness. All right. So last part of the presentation, just a little bit of observations at a very high level. Again, this could be a 4-hour session we can go into in a lot of details, but just at a very high level, what are the spend priorities? This is kind of the latest study that came out, and all you see is cloud, cloud, cloud. So cloud is important. Okay? Cloud applications, cloud infrastructure. But then you also have a huge focus on complete revamp of data analytics and BI. It's all going real time, it's all going distributed, it's all going AI enabled and so on, right? So there is a lot of innovation that's happening there and so on. You're going to go down the list. And what I found peculiar in this study is this. Just 5 years ago, you go talk to IT, oh, we want to automate everything. Right? So now, that is an attribute that IT is looking at suppliers, is looking at their partners, SI partners, is looking at the cloud itself as delivering that automation as opposed to this being enterprise IT's internal burden. Because they have tried and tried and tried and failed and failed and failed. Okay? Automation is just garbage in, garbage out, as you know. It has to be done right. Okay? So I thought this was very instructional. So with that, a few predictions, and again, this is sort of my take on it. This is not an analyst study here, of what I believe over the next whether 12 months or 24 months, but certainly over the next 36 months, you will see these shifting trends. Okay. So first one, dominance of Big Four. Somebody asked the question earlier, what happens to that 40% market share? It's going down. Okay. If anybody in the room believes that IBM actually is going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Big Four, despite kind of the change in leadership, and there is a lot of press stories that, hey, you know, IBM has found its Satya Nadella and so on, good luck. It's not just about the CEO. It's about the company culture. Okay. IBM has been and will remain a company that likes to protect its oil well. And those oil wells are shrinking. People are all going into solar, and people are all going into electric vehicles.
Do you think Alibaba will make a big dent in the sort of the markets that the other three are playing? I mean, the capital market in China and Asia, as I understand.
No.
So it's really almost a geographic segmentation.
Yes.
So you're looking at these three becoming, in some sense, cleaning
In
up.
this time frame you're talking about, again, I want to make sure we all keep that in mind,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Back to the first slide, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The time frame we're talking about, Alibaba will remain China-centric. Okay, which is a big market, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they got it.
Because why? Because the Chinese government says so.
Yeah, right.
Very simple.
quick question. Just one
Hang on.
question.
Guys, can you just do me a favor? Perhaps we can let Parmeet.
This is the last slide, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. You want to hold the questions after that?
Yeah.
Is it okay? All right. Okay. So that's the first prediction I'm making. 2019, the total share, if you add them up, of the total cloud spend was 60%. In next 12 to 24 months, this will actually increase to 75% of the total spend between the Big Four. Next is commercial off-the-shelf applications. They are not going anywhere anytime soon. Okay, and that's what we experienced. That was the whole thesis of why we started Cloud Simple. That when people have their Oracle apps and their SAPs and their VMware infrastructure and so on, the promise of migration to the public cloud is just a promise. So when we started Cloud Simple 3 years ago, this is the data that we came across. VMware, so total number of IaaS virtual machines in the market at that time was roughly 80 million. Okay. About 60 million of those were VMware virtual machines. I'm talking about on-premises. In 5 years preceding that, between AWS, Google, Azure, Rackspace, and a bunch of other, IBM, all put together, 9% of the virtual machines that were on-premises had successfully migrated to the cloud. Or in other words, non-on-prem infrastructure. Okay? Meaning non-self-managed, less than 9%. Okay? And that was illustrative to us, amount of waste in attempting to migrate from on-prem commercial off-the-shelf to cloud-native stuff, whether it is the infrastructure or it's the databases or it's the applications. Okay? Now you could make a clean break if your application provider, you are using Orbs, Toji, financial applications or CRM applications, and now you want to go to SaaS. Yeah, a lot of companies may. As a matter of fact, SaaS is the one that has been most successful. But that's not a migration. That is make a clean break and adopt the new, right? So that's where we came up with the thesis that, hey, what if we can deliver the private cloud as is, as a service from the public cloud? So in our case, we focused on VMware. So what if we deliver a native VMware stack running on the bare metal resources inside the public cloud in such a way that it is sitting behind the edge of the public cloud, number one, so you get all the security benefits of the public cloud. Number two, it is totally integrated with the public cloud networking and public cloud PaaS services and security and so on, right? But number three, the most important, is all the investments that enterprises made over the last several years in hardening their VMware infrastructure. What does that mean? Their skills, their policies, their subnet space, their firewall rules, and so on, and monitoring. Monitoring is hardwired to the VMware APIs and so on. What if all of that works as is? You get your own subnet space, you get your own firewall rules, your own policies, you are not stuck with the backup policy of AWS or Azure. What if we are able to bring all of that existing entrenched goodness, but then have the customer start consuming it as a service, which is fully managed, fully automated, and so on. Okay. Guess what? If you go inside, some have publicly disclosed, others have not, but if you go inside the big four, or big three at least, Google, AWS, and Azure, all of them have this commercial off-the-shelf lift and shift front and center of their migration strategy. The whole definition of migration for them has changed. It's no longer migrate off on-prem onto cloud native. It is migrate off on-prem and will give you the same thing as a service. You want SAP, we'll give you as a service. You want Oracle, we'll give you as a service. You want VMware, we'll give you as a service. Okay? And this is going to be a huge trend. There is tons of money to be made here, where you leverage a lot of the existing legacy learnings and know-how that you have, and you repurpose that for that as a service in the cloud. Companies need a lot of help with that. SaaS goes open. Take your pick. Salesforce will need not keep running on their proprietary force.com platform forever. Okay? A lot of the SaaS providers, every SaaS provider out there, Workday, Salesforce, and from there on down to all the smaller ones, have initiatives underway. Hey, how can we adopt the open standards infrastructure that either AWS or to a certain extent Azure and certainly Google provides? Okay. So a lot of SaaS is going to start riding on the open cloud infra over the next few years. Okay. And that has implications for your IT customers that are using that SaaS. Because if they have, let's say, AWS infrastructure they're already using for their homegrown cloud native applications, and now certainly the commercial SaaS offering is also running on the same architecture, there is beautiful magic you can start to create in terms of interoperability. Cloud agnosticism, right? Clouds are going to go agnostic from a consumption perspective. Okay, companies are realizing that if they do not course correct this, they're going to get caught into the same type of silos that they had to deal with in the past. In the past, the silos were Dell versus HP versus Cisco versus on and on and on. They don't want that in the cloud. Okay, so that is what's forcing a lot of the cloud providers also to API enable everything. AWS actually, as a matter of fact, another reason why AWS had such tremendous success so far is that they were the only ones who did not pay lip service to API. They built APIs before they wrote any code. They defined APIs and published APIs before they write any code, right? That's the reason why they have been so successful with the developer community. Now Microsoft is following suit and Google is following suit as well. Okay. Next one, proliferation of HPC. So again, a lot of the early success, and one of the ways cloud providers have been able to deliver massive margins for their own business and also deliver TCO proposition to the enterprise customers is because the hardware infrastructure has been all commodity. Okay, they've just gone that route that, hey, we don't need to have high performance boxes, we just need commodity hardware, stitch it all together, we have a software construct which will glue it all together, it works like magic, and customers don't care, right, what the hardware is. Guess what? Customers now always kind of stay ahead of the curve that now they want to exploit the cutting edge. So the application workloads, like a lot of the ML AI applications, they cannot just continue to run as is on commodity hardware. So what you're going to see here is, this is already happening with every one of the cloud providers, that high performance computing at a premium is now starting to become available for specific use cases. And the last prediction, what's the killer application in the cloud? My read of that is, it is going to be DR as a service. If you think about disaster recovery the way it has been done, it's set up, commitment of a geographically different, separate data center, allocating separate hardware, having processes and personnel in place to manage all of that. For what? Just in case we have an outage maybe 3 times a year. Think about it. The way DR has been built so far for the customers, the better the performance of that overall investment, the primary workload and the DR backup workload, worst is the return on investment of DR. Because you're sinking all that money and you're not using it. Why? Because your primary is working wonderfully. Okay? So that's the dichotomy of disaster recovery. And if you look at the budget spend of enterprise IT, you'll be shocked how much money goes into non-primary infra and non-primary workloads. DevTest and DR are the two biggest sinks. Where, how do you justify all of that spend? But you need it for that one rainy day. Right? So what if you can actually have disaster recovery? This is where the OpEx piece makes a lot of sense. I can dial up, dial down. Right? I can use cheap storage. I can use commodity hardware. Right? I don't have to worry about policies, processes, personnel, none of that. It's a service. Right? So this will continue to be, so again, if you want to kind of build a very specialized practice which can make tons of money with the cloud providers, is enablement of DR as a service. So I've taken more than 30 minutes, apologies.
No,
but
thank you.
these are some thoughts I want to share.
Thanks so much. I think my question was, you're looking at your prediction. Do you see any small company trying to take on the big four? Your Debunking, do you think somebody could do that?
You mean to be another viable cloud provider?
How about Rackspace, for example?
No way. No. Forget about Rackspace, even IBM cannot afford that. It's a numbers game, it's a big boys game, it's a deep pockets game. Why? Because all of that capex that $3.7 trillion spend has to worry about, now these 4 or 5 guys are worrying about it. They have to outlay that kind of expenditure to be meaningful. And for these cloud providers, it's not sufficient that, okay, you open a data center here in Silicon Valley, one in Seattle, one in Virginia, and then a couple in Europe, and 2 in Asia, and you're done. No. Having 50 points of presence is just the starting point for these cloud providers. 50 data centers with a capacity of, on average, about 20,000 nodes. You just do the math on that. This is billions, and the 4 cloud providers in 2019 spent $67 billion on capex.
So
Hold on, 67 billion. Okay, this is not a startup game. Startups have, with us, there are many other ways of building success, riding these coattails. This is going to be a classic ride the coattails economy.
what is Google's angle here? I mean, Microsoft's angle is very clear. You articulated it.
Yeah.
To pull ahead. What is Google's angle?
So the things that Google is really good at is modernized workloads. Google is well ahead of Microsoft and AWS when it comes to AI, ML, and things of that nature. Okay. If you look at their compute and storage, including kind of the control plane for that, it is vastly superior to Azure and is very competitive to AWS. Okay. What Google has consistently lacked in is an utter lack of understanding of enterprise IT.
Absolutely.
So he is now the Chief Customer Experience Officer for Thomas, so all support and professional services and so on. What he inherited was, there was, enterprise IT customers had no way of talking to a human person for tech support.
They were doing dive and catch.
They had no clue of how to sell to the enterprise and how to service the enterprise, but great technology. That is what Thomas is attacking, right? Beyond that, I don't think technology innovation is necessarily how the winners are going to be decided. It is going to be decided by your understanding of the enterprise IT and your ability to sell them. It's execution. It's pure execution.
So Microsoft.
And the fact that the finish line is still far in front of us, 4, 5, 6 years from now, maybe you can declare a winner in the cloud. So you don't write them off.
You mentioned that SaaS is the bigger thing, right? Of course, what you're looking at, the Google and other guys, is mainly infrastructure or maybe PaaS kind of service, right? Not the business applications, right? And if you see now SAP, Oracle, and all biggies, right? They are actually coming with all the SaaS-based offerings, and if you see their also reporting, right? They mainly report cloud revenues, right? So like VMware has now gone and partnered with the cloud providers. Do you see a similar trend where SAP and Oracle, they will actually say, okay, so I'm providing business application, but it will be running in conjunction with AWS or Azure or Google?
Not that they will, they are. All three cloud providers, Google, Azure, AWS, have deep entrenched partnerships with SAP that have already been announced. Go read up on that. Azure in particular is going gangbusters with SAP and HANA as a service. Okay, so it's already happening. Oracle finally just recently got off their Kool-Aid of continue to be difficult with their licensing models and so on, and have come to terms on that with Azure and with Google, not with AWS yet.
Yes.
So will they abandon their independent cloud efforts?
Services, let's say HANA, which was available earlier as offering, now it's available in the place. But what I'm saying is the SAP solution, right? Let's say R4 systems or any recent, which is actually SaaS, but still running in SAP data centers, right? All over the world, right? They are actually not migrating those things into, let's say, AWS or Azure, right? Like Netflix, right? They were having their own data centers completely, they are into AWS.
Yeah.
So that kind of move, do you think it's going to happen?
So again, I will go back to how the buy cycle goes inside an enterprise when they have to make a decision on buying infrastructure, buying applications, paying for support, and so on, right? So if I am CIO of Chevron, right, and I'm spending, I have no idea what this budget is. Let's say I have a $500 million budget, that's what I spend, and I see a major shift in my spend to going to Azure, let's say, right? That, hey, I spend with Azure $10 million out of $500 million, no big deal. But where I'm seeing is that since I'm moving their lock, stock, and barrel for a number of reasons, in next 3 years, 300 million of the 500 million is going to be spent with Azure, right? Those are the forces, those kinds of ELAs is what drags even SAPs of the world. That, hey, let me just piggyback that. And by the way, it's very beautiful. What you will see is this is all goodness for SAPs of the world. Why? Because they will be able to have a low-cost model for sales. They are themselves going to start writing those coattails of the cloud providers.
Yeah.
What is the other option? Let the people abandon SAP and go to the SaaS offerings, right? Because sooner or later customers are going to want that, right? So how do you stay relevant when the trend line is that customers do want to move a whole bunch of stuff to the cloud? The same conundrum VMware faced. That's why I said 3.5 years ago, go look at analysts. Everybody writing them off, and now look at their numbers. There's complete revival of VMware. Why? Because they successfully managed to keep themselves relevant in the cloud world as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, so I think that's, so I think the commercial off-the-shelf applications go away, but they start to become a service hosted in the public clouds.
And the second question is, see, a lot of people you said, right, I really appreciate them, how do you move them from, let's say, on-premise to the cloud, and you have to have a kind of balance view, right, what exactly makes sense, right? So in terms of hybrid cloud strategy, what do you see a trend? Do you think that's still something which will be...
So there are factors which will keep part or full footprint on premises. So what are those factors? Regulatory policy is one, right? Like in Europe and other places, the data has to be kept close to chest, it has to be kept in the territory. Depending on data type, there's all kinds of other restrictions you have to comply with. So that's one factor where, okay, from a regulatory perspective, you just don't have a choice. You have to keep it close to chest, right? Other factor which will keep it close to chest is that I have a lot of capex still on my books. When I still have $200 million worth of hardware that is not fully amortized, how am I going to go to a CFO and say, okay, now I want to spend another $200 million in the cloud? Ain't going to happen, right? So that's another factor which will keep things entrenched for a while. Third factor is architectural, right? You could have a commercial application, you could have an SAP where you have customized the hell out of it, and those developers who customize it are long gone, you have no idea, it just works, and if you disrupt it somehow, you have no idea, there's a high level of unpredictability. So all of that application rationalization is a practice, helping customers understand, right? What aspects can go to cloud, what aspects can be modernized, versus what aspects have to stay entrenched on-prem.
Well, I know we want to spend many more hours with Parmeet, but I'm respectful of his time. It's a Saturday and he's headed back home after this. But gosh, this is exciting, isn't it? I mean, I was just fixated on the talk for several reasons. One, you made it very interesting, which you always do. You're a great orator. But some nuggets of information out there that is so germane to what's going on in our lives here, in our corporate lives. And I think a few of us, and Shirish, I'm sure, will be the first one along with me to put up the hand saying, it gave us some ideas to go and sell to some of our customers, because knowledge of your customer's customer, that's what you were giving us that insight when we were talking. So I want to thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. We got something very small to.
It's not Scotch, right?
It's not Scotch, but it's a very good California.
Thank
Before you go,
you. Thank you.
Parmeet has been a long-time supporter of Xoriant. So we started working together in 1993, and then Nutanix was, we are getting old now.
Yes.
So Nutanix was because of him, and then I think we tried to take it in Choreo, but I think as soon as we kind of came and met you, you kind of sold it off to IBM.
Yeah. So we've been associated from Tech Edge days.
Yes.
And we had another partner in crime. So I've known these guys, great friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's quite an honor. Appreciate it.
Fantastic
No,
presentation.
thank you.